And welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion of corporate social responsibility. So we're going to continue our discussion with of leadership and business models. Now, business models. Somebody think, well, didn't we do models before? Yes, we did. But this is a business model. It's a little bit different. Business models explain how we create value by making and selling products in the market. And there's two kinds of business models. You've got the traditional and the progressive. I have no idea why they call them traditional and progressive, but anyhow, no, that's not entirely true. We're going to discuss why they're called traditional and progressive. So the traditional one is basically focusing on almost like a compliance approach with ethics. It embodies Adam Smith's original ideas that a business is most responsible when it complies with the law and creates value. Okay. Now, the progressive business model is more about in line with the CSR perspective. So you create value by, of course, meeting market demands, but you are in some way filling in gaps or achieving functions that society and government normally cannot do, and therefore you're improving society in some way. Okay. So you're looking at business as an actor for societal change. And so, of course, there's kind of a whole spectrum of responses to social demands. On one hand, you got this narrow response. Again, that's more the traditional model. Obey the law, make some money. And you kind of have this, well, we can obey the law, we can respond to some pressures via the stakeholder model, and we can take on some duties. And then you have the really expansive response, and that's anticipating new demands, altering behavior before there's any sort of governmental or societal pressure, really being a leader in the field of responsibility, and of course, implementing CSR. So how do you implement CSR? That's a good question. So let me just point out something here. You start off with CSR review. Okay. Then you proceed to CSR strategy. Then you move on to implementation. And then you move on to reporting and verification. For those of you who have any experience with Lean Six Sigma, you're going to actually notice that this process is very similar. It's not really all that unique to CSR. So this CSR review, that would be like your define phase, as opposed to define and measure. Your CSR strategy will be like your analyze. Implementation will be like improve. And this is your control phase. You may see this referred to in your professional career as DMAIC. Define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Okay? So there's also kind of a continuous feedback loop that goes on here. Let's talk a little bit about that. So CSR review, what does that mean? Well, in order to do anything with CSR, you got to know, what are we doing already in CSR, and where do we want to go? How do we define the problem, and how do we measure what we're already doing? There's no reason to do anything with CSR unless you already know what you're doing now. That's important, okay? Just like in the define phase from Lean Six Sigma. So CSR implementation. You start, overall, you assess your firm's current situation. What are you doing now? You discover the core values. Basically, you look at your strategy and your mission statement and decide what's important to you as a firm, what are the ethical principles you embrace. And of course, you talk to stakeholders, internal and external. Ask customers, suppliers, shareholders, employees, hey, what do you think is important to this firm? You take all that information and you may come up with, or you may alter your mission statement. That's a brief statement about the basic purpose of a corporation. That's your mission statement. Now then you have to look at strategy. Okay, let me put up mission statement. That's a key term. Okay. And you have to look at the strategy that you currently have, your CSR strategy. So you analyze what all that stuff that you found during CSR review, how does that fit into the firm's current strategy? That's the analyze. Now, there are many, many definitions of strategy. I'm going to use the most widely accepted definition of strategy, not necessarily one specific to CSR, because the idea that strategy is a basic approach, method, or plan of achieving the objective, that tells you nothing. Okay? The most universally accepted definition of strategy is, and I'm even going to write this down, the pursuit of competitive advantage. I'm going to say this again because it's important. Strategy is the pursuit of competitive advantage. Okay? What does that mean? It means that CSR should in some way tie in to your pursuit of competitive advantage. And creating shared value certainly does, as we're going to discuss in class. But nonetheless, you have to ask, how does our CSR and our goals and our values and our mission tie into our pursuit of competitive advantage? Because if you're doing anything that does not directly contribute to the pursuit of competitive advantage, probably you're doing something that detracts from the pursuit of competitive advantage. Okay? So just remember that. So how does your CSR tie in to your competitive advantage? Now once you decide how your CSR, your mission, all your values and stuff tie into your strategy, then it's time to go ahead and implement. So you first of all start off and basically reify or make concrete your corporate social responsibility. You can implement a decision-making structure. You can implement bureaucratic structures. You develop action plans, procedures. You put them in memos. You distribute them to all of the employees. And of course, you establish some sort of a performance target and timeline for their accomplishment. This is not unique to corporate social responsibility, but these are generic strategy processes. Okay, so you have to implement. Now, typically, implementation is done just like an improve. What you do is you call pilot processing. So you say, well, I've got like 100 things I want to do with CSR, but how about I implement them one at a time, see how our stakeholders react to it, then adjust, fix that one step, get all that kind of taken care of, and then move on to step 2, then to step 3, then to step 4. You don't dump some sort of a new CSR, this new vision on employees. It takes time for people to accept and digest things. So give it some time. Okay? These are not things that happen overnight. Implementation is a step-by-step process. Of course, you can also set up incentives. Just once you achieve a certain step, then there's some sort of incentive, like you get a bonus, or you get praise, or a high five, or a little bit of a lunch. And this encourages the achievement of targets and makes people accountable. And hopefully, it will take years. You need to realign corporate culture with strategic intent. Again, these are generic strategy processes, not unique to CSR. And then you have reporting and verification. And that basically involves you as a leader getting out of your office and making sure that managers are following your guidance and your subordinates are following your guidance. Make sure that you have some at least internal transparency of CSR, and make sure that you have some way of measuring your progress towards your overall goals. Remember, with CSR or with any other strategic process, doers do, but leaders check. So you as a manager need to check and make sure that CSR is being respected. Now, of course, we have this Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, and that's one way to facilitate not only managers adhering to CSR, but can also enable people on the outside to make sure the company is at least doing what they're saying when it comes to CSR. And of course, the Global Reporting Initiative has this triple bottom line report, and that says, well, you've got this financial thing that we all know from accounting class, and you've got, what is the social impact, and you can probably measure that in dollars and cents, maybe. And then you've also got the environmental piece. Again, these are very hard things to measure. So you have a few terms that you might be aware of with CSR. You've got transparency. Again, the state in which a company's social strategies, structures, and processes are visible to external examiners or observers. Again, this makes very little sense from a strategic angle because imitation is the greatest threat to competitive advantage. So the more transparent you are, the more you're going to erode your own competitive advantages, typically. However, some transparency can provide comfort to consumers and therefore result into a competitive advantage. It's a delicate game that you have to play. Of course, there's sustainability reporting. Again, documentation on your how closely your corporate operations conform to your goal of sustainable development. Again, sustainable development. You have economic growth, yet there's no social or environmental impact that's harming future generations. You got your triple bottom line, again, focusing on economic, social, and environmental performance. And of course, assurance verification by audit that your corporate sustainability reporting is reliable and accurate. Here are some of the costly errors in CSR. Giving no coherent, systematic thought to CSR. Just giving some money to something and saying, man, we were responsible. Well, you might have been responsible in some vague social sense, but you weren't responsible as a company. Any company that performs any action with no coherent or systematic thought probably has greater issues than their simple CSR process. Again, that's a general strategic comment. They allow CSR strategy to be reactive. So when government and society pressure them to engage in corporate social responsibility, then they react. And then they try to align it with their core competencies and their business strategies. That's a bad idea. Any good business, whether it's CSR or not, will anticipate market demands before the market demands them so that they can be a leader and a first mover. Again, if you're a leading social responsibility advocate, others will always be struggling to catch up to you. You don't want to be the second or third mover. Again, general strategic comment, not unique to CSR. Some people also make CSR a distinct strategic business unit with very little central oversight. Again, this is a general strategy comment. If you are allowing certain strategic business units to operate and take resources and money and time, and you're not giving any oversight, you probably have bigger problems than your general CSR program. And of course, they don't give any sort of credible reports for CSR actions, and stakeholders believe that some sort of transparency test has failed. Again, I would highlight, creative entrepreneurs get rich, creative accountants go to jail, or they get in trouble. We also have corporate philanthropy. That's kind of an offshoot of CSR. Generally speaking, from a corporate treasury, you give money, property, or work for the welfare of society. One example that I know in a previous job, we would go work at a homeless shelter on a weekend, and in return we get some extra hours off from work. That wasn't a bad way to do it. One thing that you want to think about in corporate philanthropy, generally speaking, taxable, you can have a charitable contribution to a charitable cause, and it can be deducted from your corporate earnings up to 5% before net profits. Is actually now 10% since 1981. However, very few corporations even give more than a couple percent towards charitable causes. The overall majority of philanthropy in the United States is done through private philanthropy. We also have strategic philanthropy, which ties into our creating shared value discussion that we're going to have in class. Strategic philanthropy basically means you're only giving to causes that in some way benefit stakeholders. And because it benefits stakeholders, then in theory, you as a firm will benefit as well. So it's giving, but giving in such a way that aligns with overall commercial objectives. Another example is cause marketing. That's a form of strategic philanthropy in which charitable contributions are based on the purchases of a product. So basically, if you buy this, for every cup of yogurt you buy, we will donate 5 cents to hungry children in country X. Okay. Now, how many people actually buy these kinds of things just in order to get the 5 cents? I don't think the research is all that good. You have some sort of bizarre mixture of altruism and self-interest. I don't really know how effective it is. I don't think there's a lot of research that shows that it's all that effective for either the corporation who engages in cause marketing or for the consumer. Generally speaking, that when we look at corporate social responsibility as a form of philanthropy, this is seen to be inefficient. If you're just giving away money to some random societal cause, that can generally be seen as a waste of stockholder money, okay, or of the corporate treasury. And so then, in theory, that leads to a business that's less efficient than possibly its competitors. It's seen to be eroding from competitive advantage. That's why things like creating shared value and strategic philanthropy are generally seen to be a preferable approach. More and more people also within corporations are making social responsibility more of an ordinary business function, and so therefore the people in charge of charitable donations and funds are being held to the same accountability standards as their colleagues are in other divisions of a company. And finally, we have philanthrocapitalism, an emerging form of philanthropy that uses market forces to achieve results. Great. So we have wrapped up our discussion of corporate social responsibility. In class, we're going to discuss a different way of looking at it, creating shared value. So, once again, my name is Duncan Pelly. I hope you found this lecture informative and entertaining, and we'll see you next time.